So I'm David Eaton. I'm one of the nurse practitioners at Seattle Children's Autism Center, and Jim Mancini is on vacation. Lucky him. Oh, that got loud. And so I'm just filling in tonight, introducing our speakers tonight. Tonight's topic is Autism 204, the ins and outs of ABA. And tonight we have Dr. Herriot-Miramontez, and she's been working with children who have special needs since 2002. She began as a classroom aide in San Diego and moved on to the University of Washington, where she got her degrees in her master's degree and her PhD in special education. She holds a state teaching certificate and is BCBA certified. During her master's program, she worked in a number of the different research programs for the University of Washington, and then ultimately was actually leading one of those research programs as the lead teacher in the project data study. Then we also have Dr. Heather Wallace, a master's level of BCBA. Heather Suarez. In between, it's always tricky when you have kind of your professional name and et cetera. You have to switch things up a little bit. So we have Heather Suarez, and she graduated with her degree in psychology from Santa Clara University and also had kind of a similar passion to work with children. Upon graduation, she actually went and taught in South Korea for a year. She came back to the University of Washington, got her master's degree and a teaching certificate in early childhood special education. She also spent some time working in Peru with children and adults who have special needs. And then in 2006, she became an autism consultant at the University of Washington, where each of them essentially met. And in 2009, they formed this STEPS group. And this is a company that provides in-home ABA services to young children with autism. For the past 4.5 years, they've been working with these children and their families to provide high-quality ABA instruction through these one-on-one interactions, which you'll see a lot of tonight, and working on parent training, coaching, facilitating play dates, social skills groups, lots of different applications of ABA principles. So we look forward to a great talk tonight, and thank you very much for coming. Oh, one last thing, sorry, I should make sure if you have any questions, just know that this is being videotaped and it'll go on to YouTube. So we asked no kind of patient health information in any of those questions that you might have tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. How is everyone today? Good? All right. I'm going to start off with just seeing who's in our audience today. Raise your hand if you are a parent of a child with autism. Awesome. Great. How about a service provider? SLPs, OTs, psychologists, BCBAs? Great. And then teachers. Are there any teachers in the... Good. So we have a good mix of people, which is wonderful. So we are going to start off. We're going to talk about the principles of ABA and ins and outs. And if you guys have questions, let us know, and we'll either write them down or get them at the end of our talk. First of all, we're going to just talk a little bit about STEPS. There's 5 of us, consultants, BCBAs at STEPS right now. And typically, after children get a diagnosis of autism, lots of professionals recommend what's called ABA early intervention. And we typically see children after they receive that diagnosis. So we work with kids anywhere from birth to 8 years old-ish. And we also do social skills groups for older kids as well. At STEPS, we provide individual ABA treatment plans, and this is what a majority of our work is at STEPS, is clients come to us with their child and we do a brief assessment, talk to the parents, we collaborate with them, work on form goals, and from this assessment and goal making, we develop a treatment plan, which has goals that we work on with the child. And so we provide some one-on-one ABA therapy, as well as a lot of our families have what's called a home therapist. And this is someone who comes in the home and provides a direct service with their child. And we at STEPS supervise, train, and kind of run and manage the team as well. All of our programs are really individualized, so it's really up to what is best for the child and for the family on the level of services. We also provide parent coaching / parent training for families as well, school observation and consults. And through our individual programs, we do ongoing assessment, progress monitoring, and developing programs. Through taking data, we are able to monitor the child's progress and keep it going. Also, we provide social skills groups and summer camps. So these groups are usually made up, social skills groups are anywhere between 3 to 5 kids typically. And right now there's a group running right now, 2 groups, 8 to 9-year-olds, and then a 4 to 5-year-old group as well. And then we also provide summer camps in the summer. So we do a group of 3 to 5-year-olds, and then we're just now going to be starting a older kid group of 6 to 8-year-olds in the summer. So, and it's a lot of fun. We do community outings and a lot of really fun things. And the focus of social camp or summer camp is on those social skills and community outings and promoting independence. And lastly, we do workshops and trainings like right now. So that's just kind of an overview of steps. I'm gonna move this so I'm not, there we go. Let me get a little comfortable here. Okay. In today's agenda, we are going to do an overview of ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, what it is and what it is not. There's a lot of misconceptions out there on what ABA is, and so we kind of want to talk about some of those and get things kind of squared away. How ABA can be used both during therapy sessions, at home, and at school. ABA can be applied in all environments, so we're going to talk about a couple of those today. And then briefly, we're going to talk just about trying to get ABA coverage by insurance. And then at the end, we'll do some questions and comments. Sound good? Okay. So first, we're going to talk about the misconceptions of ABA. Does anyone want to share a misconception that they've heard about ABA with us tonight? You don't have to. Yes. Got it. Yeah. So she was just talking about the bottom one. ABA addresses behavior only. It's not language focused. Correct. Sometimes ABA gets a rap for just teaching kids to respond, and I think that's what you're kind of leading at, because if sometimes people think, oh, they're just teaching kids to follow a direction, to respond to, what is it? What are they doing? How's it going? They become and they learn responders. Now, technically, ABA, if done right, they learn to respond and to initiate at the same time. And ABA just doesn't work on only behavior as well. It works, it's a comprehensive approach. It works on all aspects. Yes? Coercive. Okay. So this woman right here, was a misconception that she was told that ABA is coercive or that forces children. I don't agree with that. Oh, do you want to say something? Oh, Shane has a comment on that.
So I think one of the things that a lot of parents often ask about is, well, I feel like I'm just bribing my child. And I feel like that's part of it. They're only doing it because I say I'm going to give them something in return. And what a behaviorist would say about that is that there's a big difference between a reward or a bribe and a reinforcer, or a bribe and a reward. The bribe is when the child is in the middle of a store, and this is any child, right? If the child is in the middle of a store throwing a fit because they can't have the candy or they can't have the toy, and just to get them out and get them quiet, you say, fine here, let's go. That's kind of a bribe. I'm bribing you in the moment to be quiet. A reward or a reinforcer is set up and planned beforehand. You're walking into a store, you know stores are difficult for your child, you know waiting in line is difficult for your child. So you say, here's what we're gonna do. We are gonna walk into the store, we're gonna practice holding hands, and we're gonna practice waiting in line. If you can do that, when we get out and get to the car, we're gonna get X. And so it's a little bit different approach to how they're getting how they're getting the treat at the end. So that's kind of the difference between a bribe and a reinforcer. And in terms of coercion, I mean, a lot of a lot of what we do in terms of ABA is much more child-directed. So we are taking the child's lead, but we're embedding learning opportunities into that. So it's not, we don't see it as coercion. We just see it as kind of using teaching opportunities to get them to verbally express something or get them to point. It has to be sometimes adult-directed, and maybe that's where the coercion comes into play. But if you think about anytime you're playing a game with your child or doing something, there's a little bit of give and take. Your child might be doing some of the leading. You might be then changing the play, changing the flow. So,
yeah. Thanks, Shane. Anyone else? Okay. Just the first one where it says ABA is an experimental treatment and not scientifically demonstrated to be effective. ABA is proven scientifically to be effective and the most effective for children with autism as far as treatment goes. And Shane just touched briefly on the bribe versus rewards and getting kids hooked on edibles. And then the other one, ABA turns kids into little robots. I hear about this sometimes too. If ABA is done correctly, it helps that child express their personality, and it teaches that child how to learn. And then we also talked about ABA addresses behavior only and is not language focused. Another one is ABA doesn't work with older children. ABA, it's been another research proven thing. ABA does work with older children. They recommend starting early and starting the process as early as you can, but that doesn't mean that if you have an older child, ABA is not going to work with your child. ABA is all table work. I think back in the day, there was a lot of ABA was kind of thought as sitting at the table, looking at flashcards, doing things 100 times over again, but it was more table focused. ABA can be done, again, in all environments, whether you're playing on the floor, playing at the table, if you're at the park. A lot of it is done at the table, but you can do it in all environments. And then discourages socializations by keeping kids home, which is not one. ABA teaches the prerequisite skills to help kids with autism socialize. So it's working on those socialization skills. You might work on them in a more structured way than you normally would, but giving them those skills so that they can go out in the community, take turns with their friends, play at the park, and do, be social with their friends, Sorry, I'm getting a little fumbled. Anyway, and then lastly, skills only work at the table and with the therapist. This is another thing. This is super important. When done correctly, ABA, where you work on generalization as you are working with that child. You might start teaching a child how to play appropriately with Legos at the table. That's a good place to start. That doesn't mean you're not going to play with Legos on the floor with them the next day, or you're not going to play Legos with them at a different area of the house. So really making sure that when you're working with ABA, who you're working with, that embedding, that generalization, and that being able to teach those skills in all environments is important because anything else? Any other misconceptions? Shane and I were talking about these the other day, and we actually Googled it on the internet, and there are a lot of misconceptions out there about ABA. Yes. Yeah. Got it. My misconception, I was totally wrong. Yeah. We learned probably more than he did at first, and then use that at home as well. Yeah. I didn't expect it to benefit my husband and I as much as it has, just to deal with him when you guys aren't with us. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So she was saying that there was a misconception that ABA was going to be just for the child and only the child and the therapist, but it turns out, again, parents are just as much involved with the ABA process as well as the child and the therapist and the teachers on the team. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, and the reason I'm repeating myself, you guys, is because other people are hearing us. So anyway, what she was saying is on the third one with discourages socialization. When a child is receiving a lot of in-home ABA, how do you work on ABA outside of the home, correct? And work on that socialization. And we will totally touch on that here. But just some examples of doing organized play dates. A lot of our therapists actually go to the park with part of their therapy is going on community outings with the child they're working with, going to the parks, going to the stores, and also like accompanying them if they're in karate or if they're doing a chess class or doing something like that, an after school program, and helping them support. I have a client right now who the ABA therapist goes to baseball with him, goes to his chess class, and goes to the art class. So I think as kids get older, and there are more, sometimes when kids are teeny, they're little, there's not as many of those activities to get involved in. But as they get older, there's more activities, and you can work on a lot of that stuff as well out in the community too. You have to be creative, as well. So, and, sorry. Oh, yes. So her comment is that she's a teacher, and she was saying that a lot of parents are saying, "Oh, I receive ABA in the schools. I don't need to get it outside of the classroom." Can
you guys hear me? I'm trying out this mic.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think sometimes at a young age, kids do get like extended day services. So those are one-on-one services that are ABA based for children with autism. As they get older, those services aren't necessarily available. So maybe parents who have transitioned from a kindergarten or a preschool program that has ABA services, if they've transitioned up to kindergarten and now first grade, maybe they're still thinking that that's part of the process. Sometimes in my special ed program, that was a heavy focus. So by saying I have a master's in special education, that also might just, for some people, also say, oh, a master's in special education also equals training in ABA. My personal opinion is that some of the principles of ABA that we'll talk about is just good teaching. So that's another thing. A lot of what you do is actually ABA principles. You just might not call them the same thing that I do, or you might not recognize that that's what it is. But I think it's absolutely good to say that you're not exactly trained, even though you're doing, some of the same principles that probably we are as trained ABA therapists or ABA consultants.
Okay. And Shane's going to move on to what is ABA.
Thanks, Heather. So that was a little bit of what it was not. So now we're actually going to talk about what it is, hopefully. And so hopefully this will, if you don't already know, it'll kind of hopefully clear things up a little bit. ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis, and it is actually a science of analyzing behavior. And what we're basically looking at is we're looking for kind of causal relationships between, we'll talk about a little bit, between some sort of antecedent or some sort of stimulus and then the behavior that occurs afterwards. So we're trying to find out what we can manipulate in the environment that leads to certain behaviors or that leads to decreases in certain behaviors. The applied portion comes because what we want to do is we want to actually focus on behaviors that are meaningful to families and that are socially significant and socially appropriate. So the kind of working definition of ABA is that it's the application of behavioral principles to teach socially important behaviors. This gets a little clinical. These are kind of the 7 characteristics of ABA. And we'll talk about them kind of briefly, but these are kind of things to think about when we're thinking about what exactly is ABA. So it's applied. We just talked about that one. You target things that are socially significant and that are important to the family. It's behavioral. I do some guest teaching at SPU and UW, and this is one of my biggest things is, as a behaviorist, we want to focus on behaviors that are observable and measurable. We want to be able to look at a behavior and say, this is where this child is now. With our teaching, this is where this child is going to be. So we want to be able to define that behavior that we're working on, or multiple behaviors that we're working on. It's analytic. So again, we're kind of showing a relationship between something that we're manipulating or teaching and then the actual behavior that's coming about. So some other kind of important things are what they call technological. So this is the idea that if I write down some sort of plan, or I've got some sort of idea about the intervention, and I hand it off to an ABA therapist or another early interventionist, that they can read that plan and do the same thing with similar results. So it's the written description of kind of what we're doing. Conceptually systematic is the idea that we're using the behavioral principles, which again we'll talk about in a little bit. But it has to use those principles, those behavioral principles, in order for it to be considered ABA. And then it must be effective. We hopefully it should work. Hopefully our clients will gain the skills that they need and show the behaviors that we want to see improvement on. And then the last one is the generality of things. So we want it to not only stick around and last over time. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, so conceptually systematic is the idea that whatever we're focusing on in terms of the interventions or the things we're teaching are using the behavioral principles. And we'll talk about what those behavioral principles are. It's basically the ideas of antecedents and reinforcement, clear directions, teaching loops, which we'll talk about as we progress. So that last one, the generality, is that it's lasting over time. A lot of times we find when we're teaching children with autism is that they learn something, and then if we don't continually use it or practice it, they might not show us that skill again, right? So we want to make sure that we're finding ways to make that skill last over time and to see it over time, and that we're seeing it in, as Heather mentioned earlier, multiple environments. And that is one thing. ABA does get that knock, okay? They can only do it with a therapist sitting in this room at this table. Well, that's our goal as good consultants and good ABA therapists, is to make sure that they can do it in that room, but they can also do it with mom and dad, in the kitchen. And they can also do it with the neighbor next door when they're out playing on the lawn. So that's that seventh characteristic. So this is the more simplified version. These are the only three that you really need to remember. A, B, C. Pretty easy. Oops. I'm sorry. So the A is the antecedent. So this is the event that comes before the behavior. What is setting up the behavior that we want to see? We'll talk a little bit later about a teaching loop and what that looks like. But the antecedent is sometimes a direction. It's sometimes the presentation of an object if we're trying to get a child to request something. So the antecedent can be it can look many different ways. Then the behavior itself is anything we do, right? We're walking, we're talking, we're ideally not hitting or kicking, but that might happen, so we're working on decreasing those. And then the consequence is the event or the activity that happens immediately after the behavior. And it can be good or bad. So it's basically telling the child, it's giving the child feedback on the behavior that they have just done. So this kind of contingency, this ABC contingency, looks like this. This is why that random picture is over on the side. So the A is that you're seeing the vending machine. That's kind of the antecedent. We see the vending machine, we're thirsty. Our behavior is that we're gonna go over, put the money into the vending machine, okay? And then C, the consequence is we've done that correctly. We've put the money in, we've pushed the button, we get our drink. That's our consequence, or in this case, because that's what we wanted, it's our reinforcer. Does anyone have any questions about the ABC contingency?
Is that slide on our paper?
It is not. We added it this morning, so sorry. Just write ABC in big letters and hopefully you'll remember.
All right, just a little more touching on ABA. So ABA, we know it's a science, right? And lots of times when you're getting into this field, you hear about different types or models of ABA. So these are a couple, we call them kind of under the umbrella of ABA. There's verbal behavior, discrete child training, pivotal response, it's also called PRT, and the early Denver START model. These are kind of the ones that you hear most about. Let's see, we'll start with pivotal response training. It's very child-based, and it is child-based and led through play. Pivotal response, the Kegels down in University of Santa Barbara started this, and they basically they say work on these pivotal areas, which are motivation, response to multiple cues, self-management, and initiation of social interaction. So by working on those pivotal cues, that opens up the doors for working on more skills. But the crux of it, or the main idea, is that it is child-directed and more play-based. Versus you have the discrete child training. This is, I don't know, kind of gets a bad rap when you hear DDT. It's, again, people think of Lovaas sitting at a table. Discrete child training is this, which we're going to talk about too, using the teaching loop, and tends to be more one-on-one. You can use discrete child training at the table. You can also use it out in the community, and it can be very naturalistic. So when we go into in the teaching group, or when I show you the teaching loop, and describe it, and then I've got a few clips, I'm using a kind of a discrete child training, but with a very naturalistic approach. You can also use all these things and combine them as well. Verbal behavior is used, it's pretty big in the East Coast and in California. And that is working on language connections, and they use what's called errorless learning, which we do too, but that you work on the child. Instead of having them have errors, you prompt them and support them so that they are not having error after error. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about this. And then the early Denver Start model is another child, like play-based, child-initiated, and a lot of the PRT is used in the early Denver Start model. So you can combine some of these. The early Denver Start model, Sally Rogers from UC Davis and Geraldine Johnson, who was at UW, started the early Denver Start model. It was geared towards kids 12 months to 24 months, I think. And it's very family-based, focuses on the relationship. And it's based right out of here. UW was one of the main sites for starting it. So if you were talking to a verbal behaviorist, that's what they do. They do sometimes just verbal behavior, or someone who's trained in PRT just does PRT. But I guess the point of me showing you this slide is that it's still considered ABA, and there's different forms of ABA, and you can do a combination. A lot of these overlap, but the principles are the same. So, yes. Correct. So there is another one, precision. It is precision teaching, and it's based on fluency. So, and it is ABA based as well. I'm not too familiar with it. I've did it for a little while. I got trained in it, but it's not my forte. But it is an ABA based. But it's more based on kids responding quicker and with fluency to certain cues. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So, for instance, do you have a therapist trained in all these techniques, or how do you know as a parent to choose the right?
Totally. And so at STEPS, our approach, we are ABA based, and we do all of our decisions ABA based. We take a very naturalistic, individual child-based approach. So, for example, I like to use the example, if I'm working with a child, and let's say we're working on imitation, I'm going to work with that child and see how that child imitates naturally in their environment. Are they imitating me when I'm doing music? Are they imitating me when I'm playing the farm? If that child's having a hard time doing that naturally, I'm going to add a little bit more structure to help that child learn how to do that in a more natural way. So instead, if I'm doing musical instruments down at the floor and we're listening to music, and I notice that that child's not quite imitating me, I might remove the music, just get out 2 objects, and just see if the child can copy me. by doing 2 objects at the same time. And if still, I'm like, gosh, let's see, what else can we do? He's having a little bit more of a harder time. Then I'm going to increase the structure a little bit more. And that's when I might bring it up to the table and just have 1 object and we're tapping the table. So it's, gosh, I don't know if I answered your question. But no, we don't have like our therapists aren't like PR trained or verbal behavior trained, but we do a lot of these combinations using the ABA principles that Shane talked about and the teaching loop that I'll talk about with all of our therapists. Yeah.
And I think too, I mean, if we were to pick one here that we primarily use, we probably are more discrete trial training focused, but we do it in a natural way, as Heather was saying. So we kind of combine like the incidental teaching and the discrete trial training. The other ones you do have to be specifically trained to do, go to conferences, go to trainings, which we have not done, but so much of what they're teaching is overlapping in the other models as well. And the other thing about young children when you're doing ABA is that so many of the domains overlap as well. So the cognitive overlaps with the social, which overlaps with the play, which overlaps with the adaptive. So at a young age, everything you're doing kind of resembles a little bit of each of these, I feel like, or everything that we do as ABA consultants at STEPS.
And so this is, what does ABA look like in all environments? So this right here, these 4 concepts are in that previous slide, whether you're doing PRT or verbal behavior, discrete trial training, these all overlap with that as well. So basically ABA is taking a big skill and breaking it down into smaller components. So working with that child on one skill, once he's got that, all right, good, we're gonna go on something a little bit more complex. Okay, that's great, we're gonna move on a little bit more complex. So working towards that end goal. And then I'm gonna talk to you a little about the teaching loop. And then also structure and that predictability is, again, giving warnings. All right, first this, then that is part of ABA. And this structuring and predictability can also go hand in hand with like using visuals, using schedules, having those supports in place if that is something that is needed for that child to help them learn in that environment. And then data collection. So no matter ABA, it's all data driven, which is, I love data. I love making data sheets. I love looking at graphs. And I think I do it not even work related, like personally. I really, like if I have a headache for a week, I will take data. Like, what did I eat? I have in the morning, the afternoon. So it's all, so try to figure out what the problem is or what's going on. So it's all data driven as well. Yes. Oh. I don't think that it's not effective. I just know that when they were doing the research and doing the stuff at UW, it was all geared towards the little, working with the littlest kids. And their curriculum, I think, goes up until like age 4. They base their curriculum off typical development. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because it is kind of a developmental sequence. If your child is, say, 28 months, but maybe still developmentally is about 20 months, a lot of those skills are still applicable.
Yeah.
So you can definitely keep, I would say you could keep using it until the skills that they're working on are no longer applicable to your child.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and so that was for the early Denver Start model. So next we're going to talk about the teaching loop, and this is another thing I really like. Because it's a loop. There's only a certain number of steps. But this, so anytime that you're working with the child, the number one step is that discriminative stimulus. And that, like Shane said, could be a direction. If you're sit down, come here, what color, you're giving a verbal instruction. Or it could be something, if you're working on a child to request and they like juice and maybe you have juice in your hand and you just hold the juice, that's a signal. Oh, I want juice. You don't necessarily have to say, what is it or what do you want? So, or another example is if you go into a dark room, the room's dark, right? That's your stimulus. Hey, I got to turn the lights on. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something, a verbal direction or anything like that. It can be something in the environment that triggers that response. So when working, you give that stimulus, so you create that opportunity. Then you wait for the child's response. So for example, if I have a cup of juice here and the child says, oh, I want juice. Hey, awesome. You just requested juice. You can have your juice. That would be the consequence. The child's response is him working on requesting. He requested. The consequence is that positive reinforcement. He gets some juice. And then there's a clear end. So there's a loop. Now, if I am doing the same thing, it's at snack. I have juice in my hand, holding the juice. I typically give the child, it depends on the child, but I'll give the child anywhere from 5 to 7 seconds to respond. I'll wait. Child's not responding. Say, oh, we're going to try that again. So I'll go up to the front, and this time I might have a prompt to support the child to get the response that I'm looking for. A prompt can anywhere from me like pointing to the cup, and that might initiate, oh, juice, I want some juice. Then that positive consequence, here you go. A prompt may be if saying juice or supporting that child where he's at so that he says the response that we're looking for, and then they get that positive reinforcement, and it's a clear loop, so to speak. And we'll talk a little about reinforcement, but so if I'm having to prompt the child, typically the reinforcement might not be as grand or as great as if the child did it as independent as well. Does anyone have any questions? We'll go, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Correct. Okay. So she was asking, when do you consider the end of the loop, or when? So I would consider if the child is doing it with the prompt, right? And you can lessen that prompt. So first you're saying juice and he's got it. Okay, awesome. And then you kind of fade back to where you're pointing. So you're going to remove that prompt and then he's saying juice. Awesome. And then you fade back to just holding the cup and the child saying juice. So you want to remove the prompts as much to get to the point where the child is independently saying juice, and 8 out of 10 times or 9 out of 10 times when you hold that cup up. But it depends on the child. This could take weeks. This could take a day. So as far as like when it would actually be like teaching that skill, it really depends on where the child's at. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes.
How many times can you do a loop in a row?
Whoa.
I think it depends on the child.
Yes.
So a couple of things too with a loop. So a loop means also you do each of these things one time. So if the direction is to stand up, you say it one time. And I think that is something, when I was doing trainings at UW in the data project, we get a lot of pre-service teachers coming through, and giving the direction more than once and asking the direction in a question were the two biggest, kind of common errors. So when I say stand up, I just want to say it once. I don't want to say stand up. Hey, John, can you stand up? John, stand up. John, will you stand up? John, stand up right now. Because that's a lot of information that they're not going to process any of it. And it's also teaching a child that, I don't necessarily have to do it because my mom or my teacher or my sister is just going to say it over and over and over, so I don't have to listen. But if you say, John, stand up, and then you do the prompt like Heather was talking about, now they've learned, oh man, this person means business. I have to do it right away. So that's the first thing, is you always want to, you want to say it just one time. And the first time a child ever says to you, which you guys have probably this has probably happened, I taught it a lot more, and then I finally did it once and it happened, and I thought, oh no. But don't ask it as a question if it's not a choice.
Yeah.
So, hey, do you want to put your coat on and go outside? The first time the child says no, and it's 30 degrees, you're like, well, I gave them a choice and they don't want to. So it's not, do you want to? It's cold outside. Put your jacket on. Put your jacket on, and then we'll go outside. So those were the two most common errors that I found pre-service teachers doing. But to go back to your question, I feel like it depends on, you can tell if a child's starting to get tired of it or starting to exhibit some challenging behaviors. So that's when I would stop. And you might see some challenging behaviors before you learn the right number of times to do it. If I'm teaching a cognitive skill, I usually do not do more than 3 trials of that cognitive skill in a row.
Would you stagger it with something else?
Yeah.
So like break it up and then come back to it later on.
Exactly. So the question is, when you're teaching with teaching loops, would you stagger the target intervention or the target skill? And I would say yes. If I was trying to teach imitation and colors and matching, I might do a little bit of imitation with the farm, and then I might say, whoa, what color is the farm? What color is the top? Whoa, let's do this again. Ooh, let's put the cow with the cow. So I would kind of get all of them in that one activity.
Is it also important to do a prompting hierarchy when going through those steps? Okay.
Yeah, with the goal being, having the child be as independent as possible. So not to over prompt the child. Sometimes children get what's called prompt dependent. And they are just used to an adult or someone kind of starting the activity for them. Lots of times you see kids ready to wash their hands, and they'll just stand at the sink, and they're like waiting for someone to go, hey, turn on the sink, or, wash your hands. So that's another part of this, is when working with children, thinking, okay, I've got to be able to fade myself out of this. How can I get towards that point? Yeah. And just touching on reinforcement, reinforcement is a behavior followed by reinforcement is much more likely to happen again. So reinforcement is completely dependent on the child. And it depends day to day, maybe what that child is working for. It could depend trial by trial on what that child's working for. The important things to remember about reinforcement are that it's immediate. So there's that connection. I did this, I earned this, awesome, I'm going to do this again. So making sure that that's immediate. Sometimes kids are like, oh, okay, sit down. They sit down, and then they fall off their chair, and then you're like, good job sitting down. But you actually reinforce the child falling off their chair. So you have to be on top of it. And that's another thing. If you're going to give this instruction and go with this discrete trial, have your reinforcement ready. Don't be like, oh yeah, gotta go get those things, or da-da-da, because you just missed that opportunity. So, and then make sure it's contingent on the behavior. So, if we just talked about that, and then it's reinforce across situations and materials. So reinforcement's key. We all need reinforcement, like to get out of bed in the morning, to go to work. So just think about how important that is for us to keep us going. So just really, I think it's really important. A lot of times when working with kids, I'll see what that child that day is looking at. What do they want to play with? What do they want to go to? What are they into? Talk to their parents, talk to their teachers because if the child's not reinforced, they're not going to learn. So that's a huge component. Sometimes I'll be working with therapists, and they'll be halfway through a thing, and I'm like, where's the reinforcement? Oh, I didn't get to that. I'm like, where? We always had to have some reinforcement available. Correct. Yes. Yeah. Oh. Well.
Can you describe what is negative reinforcement?
So there's positive reinforcement, we just talked, and then there's punishment, and that's when you remove something. Yeah. And then there's positive reinforcement, and then there's negative reinforcement.
Yeah, so the idea, sorry, can you hear me? The idea behind negative reinforcement is that you're removing something, but then that makes it more likely to occur. So negative reinforcement is actually that example of if a child's at the grocery store and is screaming and crying, and you take them away, they've basically been reinforced by doing the negative behavior. So they're more likely to scream and cry in the grocery store again, even though that's not your intent. You don't want them to do that. So you're removing the negative part of it, but that is actually reinforcing to the child. So ideally, I mean, we don't want to do that when we're doing our loops, but sometimes we might inadvertently do that during teaching sessions.
I was taught negative reinforcement was something is happening that you don't like, and when you stop, when you go to the target behavior, then the thing you don't like stops. And the 2 examples are, if you're a guy, your wife nagging you to take out the garbage, and the other is in a car, there used to be a ding, ding, ding until you fastened your seatbelt. So does that jive with your training?
Yes.
So you remove
So-
the ding, ding, ding. So you
Yeah.
fasten
Yeah,
your
you're
seatbelt. Yeah.
That's
So you're yeah. So like so
Yeah.
for you, so the example of the grocery store is you're actually kind of positively reinforcing the child, but you're negatively reinforcing the adult. Does that make sense? You're removing the negative stimulus. You're removing the child crying. It's the same thing. You're removing the beeping by leaving the store.
Yeah.
You're removing the child crying by leaving the store. But the child's still going to be more likely to do that because they got what they wanted out of it.
They're
So-
still reinforced.
Yeah, they're
the
still
child
reinforced.
is.
So they're still going to do that behavior.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
And you're
right.
actually technically reinforced because you don't have to deal with them in the store. But you're still going to have to deal with that behavior in the store the next time as well.
That's good. So
Yeah.
the child is negatively reinforcing me.
Yeah. So the next time you go to the store and the child has a meltdown, they're like, haha, maybe I can be removed from this situation. Does that make sense? Okay. ABA at home therapy. So home therapy is working on skills to increase independence in the home and in the environment. ABA home therapy typically lasts anywhere. Typically what happens is an ABA therapist works with the child in the home, and they work on the goals that the consultant or the teacher provide to work on. And what they do is they take motivating activities that work for the child and integrate those goals within those activities. And so if I was doing Legos, I might be working, like Shane said, if a child's working on color identification, maybe a child's working on requesting and following directions. So taking an activity, providing more structure to it, and then being able to target those goals within the activity. And home therapists take data, so we're recording all this as well. And when they come to the home, they usually set up the environment, plan for those activities, plan for the goals that they're going to be working on, work with the child. In the meantime, they're also collecting data, and at the end, they graph the data. There's a lot to ABA home therapy. But the end goal is that you're working on those program goals that are discussed in the treatment plan. Yes. It totally depends. So he's asking at home, like if we work on chores, did you say? Yeah. If we work on daily living skills. We work on everything. Social, language, cognitive skills, daily living, adaptive skills as well. Mm-hmm. Well, we try to embed it in the very natural way. If we have snack, for example, naturally, let's work on the child taking the plate, putting it in the dishwasher, putting it in the sink or something. We work on skills in a natural way. We wouldn't necessarily remove the child from an activity and say, okay, take your plate away. That would just seem unnatural. Does that make sense? Okay, I have 2 clips that I'm going to show you. This first clip is a little boy. This is a little bit more of a structured environment here. I want you guys to see if you can pinpoint like teaching loops, for example. Right now in this clip, what we're working on is him expanding his appropriate play. Yes. Oh, maybe yes. Sorry. Thanks. So we're working on him expanding his appropriate play, and he'll be stacking Legos. And I think at the beginning he was stacking 2 to 3, and we're working on him. Oh, thank you. Being able to stack 5 Legos. This little boy in particular, he has a really hard time fine motor and gross motorly. So the physical action of putting the Legos on top of each other is a little tricky. But he gets better and better. So we'll see here. He is just 4 in this picture. Young 4. All right, bud. Oh, that says outside. Look, all done puzzle. Okay. Time for play. We're gonna do Legos. Are you ready, buddy? I'm gonna put 5 Legos out here. Okay. First Legos. Then, do you want lotion or boat? Turn. First build, then boat. Scooch you in. There we go. Oh. Good job, bud. You did it. 3 more, then boat. Turn over here. Oh God. Nice work, Christopher. High five. Look, it's time for boat. Let's do it. Are you ready? Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. What? More. These are your choices. You can have more boat or lotion. All right. So did you guys see a couple different teaching loops happening in there? The grand overteaching loop was, time to build Legos. And him being able, I was prompting him and supporting him, but being able to build the Legos. And then when he was done, giving him his reinforcement. Again, I set out the reinforcement. What are you working for? Established that from the get-go, and then gave the instruction. There were a couple other teaching loops in there when I was like, give me high five. And he gave me a high five. Also, when I think I said like put on or push in, I'm also asking him to follow some directions, and he's following them. This little boy, by the way, he was able to build 5, and we worked with him next, I think a little bit later, but he was able to do independent work boxes. So the goal of this was that I would remove myself, give him some Legos, and he could build by himself, which is pretty cool. And then I have one more clip.
And Heather, is that part of the loop is to start off with setting up the consequence?
Yes. Or you mean setting up the reinforcement?
Correct.
Yes. For that particular case, yes. Yeah, I had the visual schedule out and then setting up what he was working for. Yeah.
Okay, so the loop we have on here.
Oh, part of the loop.
Discriminative stimulus.
So the stimulus there was, time to build, so I'm giving him that instruction.
So before you present that, you present the
Correct. And that's technically, that was before the loop. It's not part, the giving, the reinforcement is part of the loop. But I was setting it up, I was setting the loop up, so to speak, or the instruction up by offering what he was working for.
Sometimes
no.
it's more effective. So some kids who aren't able to make choices yet, it's just giving them something that you know is reinforcing. So it's not necessarily part of it, but for him, he's a kiddo that he was able to make a choice. Knowing what he was working for was that much more reinforcing. So that was why it was done that way. But that's not necessarily part of the teaching loop. That's an ABA strategy, but it's not necessarily part of the teaching loop that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Well, when I'm teaching my kids, should I say, okay, we're going to do typing your name. Remember, when you type your name right, then you get to play with the brush. Would that be the way to start it? And then I show them the keyboard, or do I show them the keyboard and say, and when you type your name, then you're going to get the brush, or am I overdoing it?
It kind of depends. If I were you, I would say, hey, what do you want to work for? What do you want to earn for typing your name? And then having them choose what they want to earn and say, oh, okay, great. Here's the deal. Type your name and then you earn this. Deal. Yeah, but it's not technically part of the loop. I don't do it with every single loop or every single child. And this next little clip, this is a little boy, and he's working on a couple different things in this clip, but the most we're working on with him is making eye contact request and to point. So pairing that up with his verbal request. Ooh, he is just 4, I think, or maybe late 3s. Let's see. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, I think this was last summer. So, yeah. Oh my gosh, hold on. Sorry. There we go.
Got some animals? Let's see.
Oh yeah, he's younger than.
Hey, buddy. Ooh. Horse. Chicken. Food. Food. You want
Oh.
the food? Horse. Nice showing me. Horse. Nom, nom, nom. Comes my sheep. Nom, 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 nom. Nom, nom, nom. Oops. Uh-oh. I got it. Whoa. Here you go. He's eating. Will the horse eat? Nom, 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 nom. Nom, nom. My turn with the horse. My turn. I'm gonna have the horse eat. Nom, 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 nom. Horse. Horse. You want the horse? Nom, nom, nom. Let's see what else we have. Goes my sheep. He's gonna go to sleep. Oh, oh, wake up, wake up. You do it. Oh, oh no. Jump. Oh no. Look, Bill. Jump, jump. He's sleepy. Oh, oh no. Oh, oh. He's sleeping. Car. Yeah, you can have the car. It's a truck. Let's get the farmer. Oh,
Awesome. So in that clip, when we first started working with him, he liked to point with his middle finger. So notice me, I was trying to shape a partial physical prompt to get him to point with his pointer finger. So, any questions? And just one thing I'll add is, you notice in this clip, when we go to that discriminated stimulus, that number 1 on the loop, there really isn't any instruction given. By me showing the horse or the tractor, that's my cue of, I want you to look at me and use your finger and say what it is in order to get it. Okay. All right, I think it's Shane.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about what this looks like at home. So as parents, what you guys can do, that light seemed to get brighter, what you guys can do as parents kind of in your everyday routines. And I think this is what's important to when you're thinking about what it looks like, what ABA therapy looks like with a therapist, and what ABA therapy or what ABA should look like with a parent. It shouldn't look the same. And I wouldn't beat yourself up as a parent if it doesn't look the same, right? I think for parents, it's really important to number one, fight your battles, right? I mean, just pick the ones that are important, pick the things that you feel ready to fight that day. You can't fight them all, and that's absolutely okay. So we want to think of like one behavior or one skill that we really want to focus on. And I think the easiest way to do that is to pick a skill that we want our child to work on in the context of a routine that's already happening. So you're not teaching a brand new routine, you're just slipping a skill into a routine that they can already do. And thinking about, when you're thinking about what that skill is, here are some questions that you can kind of ask. What am I doing for them right now? And I think that's really important when I would sit down and talk to families about like, well, what can they do? What can't they do? And little things like, well, how do they get their jacket on? Oh, well, I put it on. Oh, okay, sometimes talking it through, families don't realize how much they're actually doing for their child. So thinking about what skills can they do now on their own, and what skills am I doing for them? Kind of self-dressing, self-help skills are some of the most important skills, but it's also the ones where there's 2 minutes till the bus and nothing is on you yet, so I'm just gonna do it. Not the best time to start teaching that skill, and that's totally fine. Do it on a lazy Saturday when you can have the time to put on the shoes or have the time to put on the coat if that's the skill that's important. Thinking about what skills they want to learn. Are they interested in looking at books or doing some playing with Legos? Are they interested in friends? So you might want to teach them how to say hi or how to say come play. So what are some skills that it looks like they might want to actually learn? Because if they're motivated to do it, they're probably going to be more likely to want to engage in that skill or that behavior. So what skills are they ready to learn? That's the difference. They might want to, I'm thinking even of typically developing kids, you know, your 2-year-old might want to climb on the jungle gym, but are they ready to climb on the jungle gym? Maybe not. And it might be the same sort of thing. They might want to go ride a bike, but maybe right now they're ready for a tricycle or something like that. So where can we kind of meet halfway between what they're ready to learn and what they want to learn? And then what skills are really important to you guys as a family? We had a client where the whole family loved to ski. So that was really important. They would go on vacations, they would go skiing, but the little kiddo at first didn't really have the skills to be able to go skiing with the family. So that was a priority for them. They wanted their child to learn how to ski. And then what kind of skills and behaviors are going to work in the context of routines that you already do? So again, what are things that are already going on? Where's the easiest place to start with skills that we want to teach? So once we kind of have some ideas about some skills, then we want to think about when is the most appropriate time to teach them. And as I said, it's probably not as kids are running out to try and catch the bus. It's probably not after a really long, hard day that you all of a sudden want to teach perhaps the toothbrushing schedule. Again, you might want to teach it when the child's a little bit more relaxed, or maybe you've had a really long day. That's probably not the best time to teach it. So thinking about the most appropriate times to teach things. Where should the teaching take place? As Heather was saying, you probably want to do it in kind of where that skill would most naturally emerge. So if it is being able to pick up your plate from the dinner table and take it over to the kitchen sink, and that's the chore or the skill that you want to teach them, I would probably do it after meal times. I wouldn't do it in the middle of a day where there's no context to the skill that they're doing. If it is waiting in line, I would take them to a Starbucks or take them to the Safeway and practice waiting in line. And then what materials will you need? So this, I think, is a big thing for families to think about. There does need to be a little bit of planning beforehand. So if you have either a teacher that you work closely with or you have an ABA home consultant, have them maybe make you some materials if you feel like you need some visuals or you need some schedules. Or maybe they have some ideas on things that have been reinforcing during their therapy sessions that maybe you can stick in your pocket to present as the reinforcer. But making sure you have any of the materials that you need either gathered yourself or gathered with help from outside service providers. So we've set the stage, we've got all of our stuff, so we've got our goal that we want to teach. Yes?
How many skills do you work on per day?
That is a great question. I think it really depends. Let's actually walk through this with an example. So is anyone, as a parent out there, can give me an example of a skill that either they're working on or they're wondering how they can start to teach it? Yes. Tying shoes. Great. Okay. So let's do this. Let's go back. What are you doing right now? Where is your child right now in the shoe tying skill? Oh, okay. Oh, you have volunteered someone else. All right. Do you feel comfortable talking about it?
Not responsible.
So they're not responsive at all. So they've got their untied shoe in front of them. You're like, hey, let's tie our shoes. Nothing.
Not interested.
Okay, not interested. Not interested. Okay. So that's a tricky one. To be honest, if a child's not quite interested yet, I might actually just have them wear Velcro shoes for a little bit longer or slip-on shoes. It might not be a battle that I'd want to fight. If it's something that, again, is a family priority and you're like, nope, I really want this child to learn how to do this, then let's go ahead and do it. So our baseline right now is that the child is not interested at all, okay? Is going outside motivating or interesting? Okay. Or can we place something outside that would be motivating or interesting to go towards?
It's a battle with wanting to be at home inside all the time and doing specific activities
Okay.
outside of what the usual activities is, which the television doesn't draw as well as video games.
Gotcha. Okay. So a couple things come to mind then about how I might go about teaching this. I might then actually have the skill be untying my shoes and taking them off to be able to get inside to get access to the video games at first. Maybe that's where I would start. And then once they're kind of a little bit better at untying shoes, which is a little bit easier skill too, you're kind of pulling and then you're just pulling up the laces. Once they've done that, maybe I would say, okay, now we need to, to be able to go outside, we need to be able to tie them. And so that might be a place that I would start. If you've got a portable DVD or video game thing, I might put that outside and say, okay, we got to tie our shoes first, and then we have to go outside. So that's kind of where I would start with that skill. So when's an appropriate time to teach it? I'd probably teach it when I had plenty of time. I might teach it on a weekend. I might teach it. A lot of kids, myself included, I'm not a kid, but myself included, do better in the morning. I get my cup of coffee, I'm ready to go. I am done by like 11 o'clock in the morning. My best hours are between 6 and 11, sadly. But so that would be a good time to teach me a new skill, is when I'm ready, awake, and wanting to learn. Where should it take place? Probably pretty close to the door and with whatever reinforcer visually able to see. And then what materials? You need your reinforcer, you need your shoes, maybe you need some visuals about what it looks like. First I cross them, put the bunny hole through. Somebody can make up a visual of the steps that it takes to do that. So that's maybe what that would look like in terms of teaching a child how to tie a shoe. So to go back to your question about how many do you teach in a day, I think it really depends. If that skill is a total struggle and it takes 25 minutes to do that skill, that might be the only thing I work on that day really intensely. I'm going to interact with my child, we're going to play games, we're kind of going to do routines that we've always done, but that might be the skill that I actually planfully target to teach. If skills are a little bit easier, I might do a couple a day. So this basically says about 10 to 15 minutes, 3 to 5 times a day, where I'm actually really purposefully teaching and planning for a skill. Depends on the skill you're teaching. And then, again, if it's something that is a little bit easier, maybe it's something around some verbal initiations or some communication skills, and so maybe it's a conversation that only takes a couple minutes. Maybe I would do that a few times a day with different topics. Does anyone else have another skill that they have been thinking about or trying to, yeah?
Having him get dressed. He's junior high now.
Okay.
So it's different, the M&Ms, the bubbles, that stuff.
Yeah,
It's out
nothing.
there a long
Yeah.
time ago.
Yeah.
He knows how to get dressed, but he waits, he looks at the clock, he knows the bus is going to come, he knows I'm going to get nervous. Don't want him to make the bus, and he's just happy having me
So that's a tricky one, because if he doesn't do it, he's getting reinforced. So it's almost that negative, consequence, because it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. I'd rather have my mom drive me, or I'd rather have me.
Slide it through and put this over and lift the foot up and lift the foot up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it comes down and goes on the bus.
Interesting. So, what do you guys? Does anyone have thoughts or suggestions before I pipe in? Yeah.
What's reinforcing?
Yeah. Is there anything that's reinforcing, other than staying home and having you drive?
He does like to be at school. If he has missed the bus and he's home for 15, 20 minutes, he'll be like, go to the car, let's go. Go
Okay.
to the car, let's go.
Okay.
He doesn't want to miss school because he does like it.
Yeah. So, one thing I might do, and this might be a little extreme, I might try some other things first, but this is the first thing that popped into my head, so I'm just going to say this one, is that he stays home that day. That's the consequence. And so the next day is, oh, remember, we missed the bus. If we want to go to school, we need to be on the bus. And if being at school is that motivating after a couple days, then that would probably increase the speed in which he's doing it. That's one thing. Is there anything else that's...
Do you think, because I think we forget, maybe sometimes at that age still like a visual schedule of at this time you need to be dressed, and
Yeah.
this time you need to be downstairs, because
Yeah.
he looks at the clock all the time, so
Yeah.
maybe going back to the visual schedule.
Yeah.
Just go and wake him up and shut the door.
Yeah.
Schedule.
I definitely have kids where they, if they're done before the bus gets there, they get some sort of reinforcement. And so that's assuming that one of my clients is very highly motivated by his iPad. So he can't play with his iPad and he can't watch TV until he's done his whole morning routine. And some days he doesn't. Some days he doesn't get his iPad because they're running out the door but he has a visual schedule of everything he has to do, and the iPad is at the very, very bottom. So when he's completed the whole schedule, he has access to his iPad for as long as it takes for the bus to get there. So it is really up to him on how fast he's going to go that morning. Yeah. And that's one, too, you can start to you can teach it or reteach it since he's got the skills, maybe on a non-school day, and just make it a game. Like, okay, let's see how fast you can do it. If you can do it with the stopwatch, or if you can do it with the schedule, we'll do this on Saturday afternoon. And then maybe on Monday morning, okay, remember how we played that game? Remember how fast we did it? Let's see if we can do it to catch the bus. So, sometimes teaching it when the stakes aren't as high, and then actually doing it when they're a little more fluent with it. Yeah. Okay. So materials, if it's a skill, so there's kind of two types of materials. Materials that you need to actually help teach the skill or help reinforce the skill. So some visual supports, the reinforcer that may or may not be there. But if it's something like playing, so you want to use, if you're trying to teach your child to expand their play skills, obviously you want to use materials that are motivating, that are ideally somewhat age appropriate, so that they can kind of share that with kids their same age. Technology obviously is huge right now, much to my chagrin. I'm always trying to teach my kids to do open-ended play with the farm and open-ended play in a grocery store, and all the parents are like, they're playing Minecraft on the Wii or whatever, and I don't even know. One of my clients tried to teach me, is it Minecraft? I don't even know. I think it's called that, yeah. So she tried to teach me. Oh my gosh, I think she was laughing me out the door. She was like, you are horrible at this game. Yes, I am. I don't know what's going on. But if kids are really motivated by technology, technology is a great way to invite a friend over and play those games together. So as much as I don't think it's social, it is actually social in this day and age. It's a great way to build relationships and build friendships around video games. So thinking about that, what activities and what materials are interesting to your child and children their age, if you're starting to think about play dates or having people over to do those sorts of activities. So making sure you've got those on hand, maybe you've got a variety of them. When we're trying to teach kids to expand their play skills, we think about what activities they like. So they like to build, but they only like to build with Legos right now. Okay, well, let's teach them Legos, let's get them used to Legos, and then let's bring some other colored blocks in, maybe that aren't necessarily Legos, and then let's bring some foam blocks in, and then let's add some cars to it. So thinking about what things kind of look the same but aren't exactly what they're used to kind of starting to expand their repertoire. Does anyone have other questions about home and what home would look like? Yes.
This was going back to teaching, when you were talking about tying shoes.
Uh-huh.
How do you know
reinforcement and exposure, he will gradually start getting the idea more and more in connected bodily function, as opposed to waiting until he's pointing at that toilet, you know, or whatever the signs are that. So how do you make that determination whether a child's ready?
That's a great question. So in general, and then I'll get specifically to toileting, but in general, I would say that a child has to exhibit some sort of interest or some sort of, I don't necessarily want to say content knowledge, but some knowledge or awareness that that thing is happening, right? So if it is reading books or if it is playing with certain toys, that they're at least acknowledging that those things exist, or they're at least looking in that direction. And once they've kind of done that, then you can bring it over and say, yeah, you're looking at this book, let's look at it together. Or yeah, those are the Legos, let's build, or let's drive the car. So I think that some sort of acknowledgement has to occur with some of those kind of more play-based or cognitive-based things. In terms of toileting, not necessarily a concept of wet and dry, but maybe an uncomfortableness with being wet is a sign that they might be ready for toileting. A little bit of maybe looking at the toilet, a lot of our families say that, oh, they can tell when their child is going in the diaper because they're walking somewhere else in the room or they're asking for privacy. Those sorts of things are often indications that a child might be ready to start being toilet trained. Yeah.
I can also tell you from my experience that I sort of thought my daughter was ready, but I just wasn't ready, like to take it on.
Mm-hmm.
And her teacher sort of said, "Out of the way, Mom, we're doing this." I mean, I was really fortunate that I had a school and they did it. So I was thinking, if you're up for it, and you can just sort of, here's the plan to your daughter, I say go for it. There's nothing to lose. Go for it. And you might have to just bring Mom along with it.
Yeah, I don't have him that much, but I don't think he's aware of he's certainly not uncomfortable. He certainly doesn't have awareness of it. But he knows if you set him on the toilet, he's supposed to run. So he has that awareness.
Mm-hmm. So I like your point a lot, making sure that everybody's on the same page, because I think that's another big thing. So even asking school, like, what do you think? What do you see? Because if the expectations are different in different environments, then the plan's not going to work at all. But if the expectation is the same, and maybe if school does spearhead it, depending on how often he's at school, a lot of our kiddos now are in school sometimes more often than they're at home, you know, not counting the sleeping hours. But if they're in school from 8 to 3 every day, and then they're home from 3 to 6 or 7, and then they're getting ready for bed and taking a bath, they really only have a few hours at home where they're engaging and whatnot. So school might be a good place to start doing some of the toilet training and things like that.
I just didn't have Henry to come up with a plan, because I knew it was going to take a lot of effort and a really clear plan, and I didn't have the bandwidth personally to do that. But they did, and together we did.
Yeah. Use your resources. That is a great, yeah. I see that we only have a few more minutes, so I do want to jump ahead to the insurance piece of it to make sure that we do touch on it. So there was actually a speaker a few weeks ago, I believe, or a couple months ago, who did a great presentation on insurance coverage and what the state of it is in Washington State. And she works for the Washington Washington Autism Advocacy, which their email or their website is on the next slide. But the long and short of it right now is that yes, it's covered, and no, it's not covered. It's very plan dependent. It's very company dependent. But a lot of self-insured plans, people just assume because they're self-insured that they're not covering autism. So I would just highly encourage you to seek out your HR and to seek out the person that you talk to about insurance plans and make sure that you know exactly what isn't covered on your plan. The tricky thing right now is that things that are medically necessary are supposed to be covered by insurance. The difficulty is ABA medically necessary? And that's what we're having, not we because we don't do that work, but that's what those people are, the advocates are having a hard time proving and deciding is is ABA therapy a medical necessity? And the problems are that we have yet to kind of adapt these these national guidelines on what the treatment should look like, how insurance companies would pay for it, what would be covered. So it's all up in the air. There's a lot of states that actually do mandate it right now, and Washington State is not one of them. We have run into situations where some of our families work for companies that are based in other states that do mandate it. And so those families actually are covered because their plans are based, say, in Massachusetts or New York or something like that. So that's something interesting to think about as well. So just because you are working in Washington State might not mean that that's where your company is housed. So again, check with your HR. And here's kind of the steps that we recommend to go about to get things covered. Is you want to get a prescription. That's kind of where that medical necessity comes in. So if your doctor or pediatrician can actually prescribe on a pad hours of ABA therapy, that's kind of the first step. There are healthcare providers in Washington State now that have proper credentials. And what those credentials are, you kind of have to be a licensed psychologist at this point, is what will almost automatically get ABA covered. Licensed mental health practitioners also will get ABA covered. ABA therapists and BCBAs are not automatically guaranteed, which is somewhat of an interesting point. But there are some providers in the state that do have the proper credentials to get covered by insurance. You get pre-authorization for treatment, and then as Heather talked about, you come up with the assessments and the treatment plan and a plan of care. A lot of times, even if insurance companies say that things are covered, they will deny claims to start just to see how much you will push back. So I encourage you to push back and keep pushing back, because the appeals and the documentation is often what either gets some of the insurance companies to change their tune or will have them paying at a more frequent or faster rate. We've had a couple of families who the insurance companies have said they'll pay, they've provided documentation that they'll pay, and then they don't pay. And so the families have submitted claims 3 and 4 times, and now they are finally paying consistently. So it's quite a headache, but kind of that persistence does pay off if your company is saying that it does cover it. Yeah.
I can personally attest that works. If you
Great.
make it as expensive as possible for them to fight you, they will cave.
Good.
That's what worked for us.
And it's probably a pain, right? But it's worth it in the end. Hopefully.
I'm very lucky that my wife was able to stay home and basically work on that for 40 hours a week. That's about as long as it took.
Yeah.
If we had to try and do that while both of us working, would have been considerably more difficult.
Wow. Yeah.
So make it as expensive as possible for them to fight you on it.
Well, good for you for pushing through. I mean, that's kind of what Washington State at least needs right now. Really quick before other questions. So on your handout is tips for writing letters to insurance companies about why ABA is medically necessary, and as well as the Washington Advocacy, our Autism Advocacy website, who have really great advocates that can kind of help you along the process of how to get insurance to pay for ABA therapy. So we will take questions and comments. Only a few minutes, sorry. Yeah.
I just want to know, what is the difference between an ABA therapist and somebody that's BCBA?
Okay, good question. So the question is, what's the difference between an ABA therapist and somebody who's a BCBA? So typically, BCBAs are the ones who run the programs, who oversee, as Heather was talking about, who oversee the program, make sure it's being run and implemented to fidelity, basically. They're the ones who will kind of push along the progress and just kind of know the smaller things to look for. They're more trained, usually. And then an ABA therapist is the one who's going in and kind of following the directions of the ABA consultant. Doesn't mean that ABA consultants don't provide that in-home one-on-one therapy. We do that on occasion, but more than likely we're collaborating with the other service providers that are on that family's team. So we're collaborating with teachers, we're collaborating with speech and language pathologists, OTs, to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're all seeing the same behaviors, we're all ideally teaching in the same sort of way.
What's the difference between your training?
A BCBA has taken a test. It's a licensed credential. So they've taken a test. They've gone through a certain number of supervision hours, being supervised, providing ABA therapy, and they have taken a certain set of coursework through a university-sanctioned program, and they have a master's. Anything from nothing to some of those classes. There's a wide range of experience levels and knowledge level that an ABA therapist has.
So how do you know if you're getting a trained, qualified ABA therapist?
You have to ask a lot of questions. So you ask questions about where their training is, what their schooling has been. You can ask, about different terminology and things like that. And usually what we do as the consultant is we give families sometimes a list of questions that they can ask. And that way you can kind of figure out what their training is or has been.
So we can see a few of our sites on the screen. If any of the external sites have any questions, I want to make sure we give them a chance before our video stream runs out in a couple of minutes. So while we find some other folks here, if anybody at the external sites have questions, feel free to hit the talk button and ask away. Give them a second. All right. If you guys get one, hit your button, and we can at least see when your your button's on, and we'll take a couple questions more in our audience here.
Yeah.
Hi. I have a two-part question. One is, what is the ideal number of TAs involved in caring for a child? Because right now we're looking at having a piecemeal approach where 4 might be involved, and that seems like a lot to me, but I don't know what's standard. And 2, can you talk a bit more about what seems to me to be the scarcity of ABA therapists? We've been trying to hire someone for the afternoon hours for almost 2 months and no success. So is there a scarcity of treatment providers right now? Can you give us some tips?
Yeah, so in terms of what's normal or what the range is for the number, I think it depends on how many hours. It sounds like you have a pretty robust program, so 4 therapists is high, but if you're trying to get 40 hours, that's probably not too terribly unreasonable. I would say 2 is the max. I have one family with 3. But as long as you found a way for everybody to communicate. So we have our binder that has all the programs in it, and we have a spiral notebook that everybody writes notes in, and all of our therapists are really good about reading those notes before they start their therapy session for that day to know what has been done previously. I think the problem with the more you get is when to find time to actually all meet in person to discuss goals and progress and things like that. So just from a personal standpoint, I don't think there's like a kind of a norm, a field norm, but for me, it's 1 or 2 in a home, just in terms of management. Yeah. And then the other one, a lot of our home therapists actually are graduate students who have classes at night, so they are also unavailable in the afternoon, and that might be part of it. Some of it also is, as kids get a little bit older, we have a lot of clients that are kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade age now, and they all go to school until 3:30. So pretty much, I would say 70 to 75% of our families want somebody in that afternoon range, and that's probably why there's a scarcity, is because nobody wants a morning time, so all the therapists are already being used in the afternoon. And tips, the feet listserv, and I don't know if you're able to put up flyers at your child's school or send out the word through school. That's sometimes how we've found therapists is people that are aides in public schools might want some jobs after school, and so they've expressed interest and been able to get some outside therapy hours. Yeah.
A lot of the examples you talked about and showed us were sort of more skill building types of goals. Can you talk about the efficacy of this for, like, I have an 8-year-old daughter with some really disruptive behaviors, and we're kind of late to get on board the autism wagon and now the ABA wagon, but feel like we need to. So how effective is it in decreasing these disruptive behaviors, and what, which of those methods under the umbrella, or what should we look for the right kind of therapist for our family?
That's a very good question.
So you have an 8-year-old daughter. Gosh, I would work closely with her teacher and see what type of strategies and stuff that they've implemented in the classroom as far as reducing her disruptive behaviors. And then working lots of times, I don't know how disruptive they are, but a lot of school districts have an ABA specialist that can come into the classroom, and they work directly with the teachers.
She does fairly well at school.
Oh, okay.
No, it's just at home.
Oh, okay.
And it's really, really in the community.
It's what?
It's out in the community. That's
Okay.
And I would think something that we didn't touch a lot on was the idea of positive behavior support. And it also fits under this umbrella a little bit. It's kind of developed from ABA strategies. And a lot of those ideas are kind of being proactive and trying to replace behaviors. So setting up an environment where the child's going to be successful, finding replacement behaviors for the behaviors that are challenging. So that's, I would look for somebody who is familiar with positive behavior support, or PBS. And I think somebody who does some more naturalistic teaching strategies also, because you're wanting to be out in the community. But that's, I would just, if you're looking for either an ABA therapist or an ABA consultant, those are things I would talk about is, what is your experience with challenging behaviors, especially out in the community? What do you know about positive behavior support? And kind of FBAs as well, so functional behavior assessments is kind of the questions and the things that I would be asking about and looking for.
And someone that's comfortable with training parents as well, because will be it. I'm guessing most of it will be a lot of parent training, getting to know you, your needs, that type of stuff, and then working with your daughter as well.
Any more questions at all?
If somebody else has one, go ahead, because I've asked several.
Oh, that was it.
I want to know, because I'm trying to find ABA therapy for my grandson, and we're on waiting lists. And I bought a special policy through Group Health just to buy him, just to get him, we're still on waiting lists. So what I'm trying to find out is, since he's never had ABA therapy in the home, how do we discern once some company calls us up and says, okay, we're ready to go, we have somebody? I'm assuming that they're going to have they're going to be the ones providing the ABA therapists. Is that true?
Yeah, so there are companies in Seattle. There are bigger companies in Seattle that do have the ABA therapist on staff as well. Smaller companies like Steps and a couple other small companies, we don't have technically ABA therapists on staff. We have ones that we work with out in the community, and usually when a family comes on to Steps, we'll give them suggestions, or people that we've worked with or are currently working with, or therapists that we know that are looking for more hours, and will help the family find a therapist. But there are bigger companies in Seattle and in this area that have some on staff.
Oh, okay. So sometimes it might be up to the family to find their own therapist.
Correct. Yeah.
To work.
Yeah. Yeah. So
But we're still on waiting list because getting down the list, I think there was 5 that would actually come into the home. One was a 2-year wait. One was next fall. And then the other 3 are, the closest I've gotten has been maybe by the end of May or beginning of June. They might have somebody.
And that's the problem right now with some insurance is covering it and some not, is the waiting list for those who are able to get covered is really, really long. Whereas the providers who aren't able to get covered right now don't have as long of waits.
And also, stay in touch with those people. A lot of people, it doesn't work out, or something comes up, or they move, or stuff happens. So being the squeaky wheel in those situations would probably be the best advice I have. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
You talk a lot about it being rewards based, and we just started down this path, and my son is not yet 3, and so he doesn't necessarily need rewards yet. He's still verbally praised, and that's enough for him at this point. So I'm more wondering, when he gets older and potentially, I have no idea who he'll be, but he might be potentially a little bit manipulative, and if it starts to go down a rewards based path, is there ever a point where you get a child who refuses to perform unless there's a reward? Like, how do you phase it out if the child refuses to perform without a reward?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's important to think about, is even when you're introducing the reward, how to fade it out. So for example, when teaching a new skill, you might give that child a reward or that social or that praise every time they're doing it if it's a new skill, right? Once that skill's acquired, you might give them praise every other time or every 3 times. And you might change it up too. Maybe it's 3 times, maybe it's 5 times. So not necessarily, he's not expecting to have it every single time. And it's more of he's earning it. And so a lot of times it's setting up a star chart or a token chart or something where he has to earn this Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday it's this type of thing. So it's not necessary. It doesn't, when we talk about rewards and stuff, it doesn't have to be every single time necessarily once the skill's been mastered. I hope, does that answer your question? Okay.
Well, so really quick, going back to the first question, where your child is right now is actually where we want all kids to be, and the fact that just verbal praise or high fives is what's reinforcing. So I would never put a tangible reward in place if that is what is effective right now, which is awesome. So just hopefully that stays around a while. So I would start teaching skills now where everybody that your child comes across, I would teach development appropriate skills right now, where everybody that your child comes across can just give verbal praise and give a high five. So if you are trying to teach, whatever the skill is, and you want them to do it with the girl next door, and you want them to do it with the retail cashier, those people can all give verbal praise right now. If not, sometimes literally I will have a bag of things with me when I go, say, out to the playground or whatnot. And if it's a toy, that's really easy for another kiddo to give, the child with autism as a reinforcer. So I can just say, hey, will you give this to so-and-so when he asks for it? Or, hey, will you give this to so-and-so when he gives you a high five? So those are way easier and more natural in that sort of setting. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's always just me giving the reinforcer, even if they've said hi to the neighbor or have said hi to whatever. So you don't have to feel like you're passing out everything all the time. So that's another way to do it, is you're just equipped with it and they're always coming back to you for that reinforcement.
I don't think so. No.
Do you want to?
I think a lot of the behaviors that we teach too, initially they need that reinforcement, and then they become reinforcement themselves. Like initially when you're teaching a kid to play with a farm, you might need to use that verbal praise, like, oh, that's right, the horse is jumping over the fence. And then the kid wants to go and do it themselves because they think it's reinforcing. Does that make sense?
The activity itself, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
this might not be very behavioral analytical of me, but what do you do with a typically developing child if they don't do it? You kind of make them do it because it's just, that's the way it is. You put your shoes on, you go outside. And so I think there's some days where you just need to do that, and that's okay. You don't want to get in the habit, again, of them being prompt dependent on that and learning like, oh, well, mom's going to do it every time. But that kind of goes back to the fight your battles, and it kind of goes back to, you know what, not everything, and we're dealing with this right now with one of my pretty high-functioning kiddos. You know, some things in life just aren't fair, and you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing right now. You're telling your friend it's not fun. You're telling a teacher that they're not doing it the right way. Nobody's caring, and I'm really sorry about that. And so there's just some situations like that where they're going to have to learn it just is what it is. And the behaviorist in me struggles with that sometimes, but I think that's sometimes, you know, there is no behavioral answer for some issues.
That you recommend for ABA therapy? Or do you ever have like adults come to you and just say, I'm not doing so good, or somebody recommends them to get therapy, or is it really more child-based?
No. Yeah, we at Steps don't work with adults. That's not like our background. But I know other providers that work with adults, teenagers, and stuff like that as well, using some of the principles of ABA. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So. Okay.
So it does work.
It does. That's for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming.